Okay, so now I will explain the passability editing that was introduced into OpenRPGMaker version 2.0. And this one is a little bit more complex and can be difficult to wrap your head around. But once you get the hang of it, you'll notice how it's very powerful and very flexible and allows you to do things that you never thought possible. So first I'm going to explain the layout I've got here for the plateaus. So I've got this set up so that the player will be able to walk along the bottom ground layer and walk one space behind the plateaus, so right along the top row here and the top row here. And I'll be doing that by placing the passability here in a moment. And then on the top row, I'll want the player to be able to walk above the bridge, whereas the bottom one will be under the bridge. So he'll walk along the bridge and along the top spaces here. And so you'll notice how, to recap what I mentioned in the layers tutorial, you'll want to have the top parts of the plateau and the bridges itself on the upper layer. And then you'll want to have the walls for the plateaus and the staircases on the bottom layer. This is so that the player does not accidentally get rendered below those spaces while they're on the bottom layer. And so now we are going to place the passability. So we're going to go into edit passability here and main layer, and we're going to make sure the mode is on set, because you can either have it set or clear the current passability. And we're going to set the phase to the player passability. And you'll notice how there's 32 phases total, and you can customize the names of them, with the first 8 being used and defined by the system itself. And so you can have additional things. The vehicles, for example, no longer use terrain to determine where they can pass and where they can land. Instead, they use the phases. So they have P for the passing phase and L for the landing phase. So that indicates what phases they can pass through and which ones they can land on. So, without further ado, let's start painting the passability for the background layer. So, I've got my rectangle tool selected here, and I'm just going to paint in the passability really quickly. Now to add the part where I want the player to be able to move behind these spaces, I just simply draw the passability there. The player is on the lower layer, and so therefore he gets drawn prior to the upper layer. So he will show up above, or he will show up below that space. And so now I'll do the upper layer passability, and I want the player to go on top of these here and across the bridges. Now the other thing to note is it's very important for both layers to have the player be able to pass on the staircases itself. So make sure that is set here. And now on to placing the stair passability. Now the stairs work in a slightly interesting way. Instead of just having a phase for move up one layer, instead it has a phase for move up and down start and a move up and down end. What that does is, let's say I place the move up start right here on the main layer. I'm just going to select my pencil tool, place it right here, here, and right there. That means when the player enters that space, it tells the engine to start moving the player up layers until it reaches a layer that has the move up end. So we'll place the move up end right there. And then we'll go and do the move down. So the move down end is going to be on the bottom layer here, and we'll want to make sure that it's below the move up start, because we don't want the player to move here, go up a layer, move here, and go back down a layer. So that's why they're like that, because let's say the player is on here and he'll reach this up end before he reaches the down start, and so it doesn't matter because up end does nothing. Up end is only used when it is actually trying to move the player between layers. So we'll place the move down start on the upper layer here, right there, at the bottom of the staircase, and we'll place the move down end right there. And so what that'll do is now the player, starting here, will be able to walk behind the plateaus, underneath the bridges, and can come up the stairs here, any of these 3 stairs, and then go across the bridges and on top of the plateaus. So you'll know, and before that was something like that was doable in some of the other RPG makers, but it required some complex event mechanics and sometimes could be really tricky to do because every single space here for the bridge had to be an event. Whereas now, it's just simply a matter of setting the appropriate passability. And then, like I said, with the layering mechanics, it will take a little bit to kind of wrap your head around the concept, but once you get the hang of it, it'll be a lot easier to use, and you'll realize how much more powerful it is. And so then, the next phase is the jumping phase. So I've decided to put into the OpenRPGMaker's engine the built-in functionality to allow the player to jump 2 spaces forward, basically jumping over the space directly in front of them. And so the interesting thing about that is we'll look at our foreground layer here, and we'll see how the player can pass here and can pass here, but he can't go between the 2. Well, that's where the jumping phase comes in. The jumping phase, we want the player to be able to jump through all of these spaces, because that allows the player to, like let's say just continuously jump along the bridge, and just jump around like a maniac for a while, and jump up and down the stairs for no reason. And actually, we probably don't want them to jump up and down the stairs, because then they might not go down the layer appropriately, unless you make sure to end the jumping phase at the appropriate location. And so now we'll place that there. Now, for the jumping phase, we're going to place one piece right here. Now what that says is that the player, so when the player jumps, they will be moving around in the player passability phase. And when they jump, they leave the passability phase and enter the jumping phase. The jumping phase will go over, in the engine, will first go over, try and go 2 spaces forward along the jumping phase. So if it gets blocked here, so let's say the player is standing here and jumps up, it'll go 1, 2, they can't move to there from the jumping phase, but they can move there. So it'll stop there and check that space. Then it'll check the space to see can the player actually land there using the player passability phase. If not, it'll go back another step until it can find a space the player can not only jump through, but also land on. And let's say for the bridge space here, we're going to put the jumping phases down here as well, so the player can just jump around freely, so it doesn't look like a seldom used mechanic. But you'll notice how we're not placing it on the bridge, underneath the bridge itself. So what'll happen there is when the player is underneath the bridge and they try to jump, the jumping phase isn't even set, so it won't even attempt to do a jump. The player will just sit there. But they can jump back around here because this is available. So, and that's how that part of the jumping will work. And so for the next part is you'll notice here how the player can move right up to this side here and right up to this side here. And then on the jumping phase, when he's in the jumping phase, he can move between the space, through this space here. So what'll happen is, if the player is standing here, he will, and presses the jump button facing to the right, he'll enter the jumping phase, which allows him to move 1, 2 spaces over, and then the engine will, before any movement takes place, the engine will quickly scan, saying, okay, can we jump through the space we're on? If so, we're executing the jump itself. Then can we move into the space in front of that? If so, continue. Can we move to the space right after that? If so, that's the maximum distance for the jumping, and so then it'll check for landing. So in this case, player standing here facing right and jumps, is it says, oh, we can jump through to this space here, and we can land there. So it will jump the player right to there, jumping over this gap, this non-passable gap. And that's kind of the interesting thing about that there, is you can now have an interesting jumping mechanic incorporated into your game. I've only really seen that mechanic used in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, but I'm sure there's a lot of other RPGs for the old school systems that I never got a chance to play. So, but that's how that works. And last but not least, the Grapple Phase and Grapple Hook. So the grapple system, this one is again something that I saw originally in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and while that game itself was not exactly one of the best RPG games, but it had some interesting mechanics like the jumping and also the grapple hook. And so the way the grapple hook will work is first in the system, you will set, on the system graphics, you will set a grapple arm and a grapple hook. I don't actually have the graphics for them just yet, but what the idea in mind is they are each one tile in size vertically, and they can be however many tiles wide, because each additional tile is just an animation for it. And so what will happen is when the player extends the grapple hook, the grapple arm itself will be simply tiled across to however far out it needs to go, and then the grapple hook will just be an animated object that moves across the map until it reaches its maximum distance or until it reaches an actual hook phase. So, with the way the grappling hook will work is in the move events, so like, for example here, I'll do a little move event. You'll actually be able, later on, you will be able to do all of this in the System tab of the database by customizing the button mapping itself. And that's not implemented yet, so I will do a video tutorial of that once it's there. But in the meantime, we'll just do a event here. We're not going to worry about when the event gets activated. We're just going to show you how the move will work. So while it's not there yet, because like I said, the grapple mechanic is brand new, so I'm still working on getting all of the kinks worked out. But what will happen is you'll actually be able to have a extend grapple hook on the miscellaneous movement patterns. And so what that'll do is it'll extend the grapple hook, and you'll tell it at that point what the maximum distance that you want that grapple hook to extend to. And it will simply extend forward in the direction that the player is facing. So, which reminds me, the grapple hook itself, for the graphic for it, will be kind of like a map sprite in that it'll be actually 4 tiles tall, and it'll have, you know, up, down, left, and right directions in the order of from top to bottom. It'll be up, right, down, left for which direction it's facing. And so now to demo the actual grapple phase system. So what'll happen here is, let's say we want to have the player be able to go from this space up here and grapple onto something right here. Well, first off, we should probably put something right there. So we'll layer this foreground layer 2 and fill it with nothing. Oops. Fill it with nothing, and let's just put a little fire hydrant there. Let's say we want the player to grapple onto that. Make sure it's aligned so that I can actually grapple to it, and then also go here, change the passability so the player cannot actually walk on this space. We don't want them to walk in through it. And then we'll also change the jumping phase so they can't jump over it. Or actually, no, I think we can make them to where they can jump over it. That's the other nice thing there, is they can't walk through it, but in this case we can use that to say, oh, they can jump over it. And then Now for the grapple phase. So this is the grapple pass. This is the phase for determining whether or not the grapple hook itself can move through a space. So we're going to allow the grapple hook, essentially on this map there isn't any, on the upper layer there's nothing blocking the grapple hook. So it's going to be able to go everywhere. And so now on the lower layer though, the grapple hook will be blocked by the walls here and the staircases. So it's only going to go like this. But it will be blocked, stopped by these. And now back to the foreground layer. So as you can see, the grapple hook can go everywhere. There's nothing stopping the grapple hook from moving around on the upper layer. It's because we don't have any walls up there. Now for the grapple hook itself. So right here is where we want the player to grapple onto this object here. Now we're going to have the grapple hook passability like that. Because what that'll do is, let's say the player is standing here, facing up, and extends the grapple hook, and we'll just, for all intents and purposes for now, for the tutorial, we're just going to assume the grapple hook will continue on infinitely until it can no longer go in that direction, or until it actually grapples onto something. So the grapple passability will say the hook will be able to move in this direction, but when it gets to here, it sees that there is a hook phase, meaning the grapple arm will latch onto that space and then pull the player right here to the space right before it. And if the player cannot actually pass on that space right before it, well, the player will just stand there and can't move anywhere. So make sure to have that cleared. And that's how the grapple system will work. So like I said, there's some fairly new mechanics here, some of which can be a little bit difficult to comprehend at first, especially with the sheer amount of phases that are available. Another interesting thing about the phases, I don't have it implemented yet, but I will be working on making it so that equipable items, such as these, any item type that is equipable, will be able to say, like we've got here, their attributes are just simply checkboxes for each attribute and usable by. It will also have a phase passability, so that an equipable item can say, while this item is equipped, treat these phases as if they were the same as the player passability phase. Thus allowing, let's say, there's a lava terrain and you want the player to be able to go through there, but they need to get the special lava boots to be able to, and equip them to be able to do so. So you have, lava passability. So what you would do is just simply set phase 9 to, let's say, lava passability. And I'll just do a quick demonstration here on that by putting it right here. We're going to clear, we'll clear just this spot right here for a good demonstration. And don't really have that much of a useful tile for it, but we'll go ahead and make it this tile here. So that's our lava for the time being. And so we're now going to make it so that the player can only pass here if they have the lava boots equipped. So what we're going to do is clear the player passability phase on there, but set our new lava passability phase. Oops, set. Right like that. And then what we'll do is, when it's implemented in the items, let's say we'll have, let's just say this one is the lava boots for now. It'll actually have somewhere on here a, phase system to tell it what phases the player can pass through while this item is equipped. And so we'll just simply check off the lava passability phase, so that while the player has the lava boots equipped, they will be able to move through the lava passability area here as if it was the same as player passability. So hopefully you can understand how that works. And that basically concludes the extent of this tutorial. I will be doing a more updated tutorial once I have the engine underway, so that I can actually fully demonstrate not only how to create these, but also what the effect they will get is. And so look forward to that coming out sometime, hopefully soon, once the editor is brought up to speed a bit. And so I will go ahead and close out here, and the next tutorial will focus on the menu editor and some other miscellaneous new mechanics introduced. And goodbye.